We are now about to go into our, I think, penultimate session of the day, which is really kind of honing in on the issue of infrastructure and how we build the infrastructure that we need. I'm very glad to welcome back my colleague Sue Daley, who's going to be chairing this session. So, Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome back, everybody. Hello, everybody. Just making sure everyone's still with us. We have an amazing panel, a fascinating and crucial topic to talk about, and all before the Secretary of State, so no pressure, panel, will be fine. The title today is Build, 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 which I really think should have been called Build, Baby, Build, but maybe that's, I'll talk to the team. Getting the infrastructure we need to drive growth for the tech sector, but of course across the UK as overall. Developing a tech sector, as you know, can deliver for the whole of the UK relies on building the right foundations, we talked about that this morning, to support regional clusters and ecosystems and growth. As the UK looks to transform planning laws, we're going to talk about that today, unlock digital transformation through infrastructure, consider locations, regional locations, AI growth zones, we talked about that earlier this morning. This session will really consider how best national, devolved, local governments and industry can collaborate to get those building blocks, those foundations in place that helps tech sector grow in the UK, but that can grow opportunities not just for the tech sector, but across the whole of the UK, but the whole of the economy. So I have a wonderful panel that's going to help me do that. I'm just going to introduce themselves I'm going to introduce them in the interest of time. We've got Margot James, former Minister for Digital and Minister for Small Businesses, Consumer and Corporate Responsibilities. Margot, great to have you with us. Kevin McKeever, Managing Director of the Lowick Group. Hugh Milward, Vice President for External Affairs at Microsoft UK. Chris Curtis MP is the co-chair of the Labour Growth Group. Great to have you with us, Chris.
Thank you.
And then should be joining us virtually is Henri Murison, the Chief Executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Hi, Henri. Great to have you with us.
Great to join you, and sorry I can't be with you in person.
Now, you don't know Henri, but you came across really loudly and you've woken everybody up. So thank you for that. But we hear you loud and clear, let's put it that way. So we're talking about building the right foundations, support regional tech clusters and ecosystems. And I want to start with the basics, really. What are the foundations? What's the infrastructure we need to support regional and drive economic growth? And perhaps, Margot, I could start with you, particularly in terms of, I know you're looking at this from the kind of startups, the SME perspectives. What is the infrastructure, the kind of ecosystems that they need to help develop in regions? What's your perspective?
Oh, thanks very much, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think, there are many things, but I would identify probably three key enablers. One is obviously connectivity, which is much better in some places than it is in others. But we do need national government to really drive through the funding where there isn't the market solution to the connectivity provided by gigabit broadband and the rollout of 5G and 6G. So I'd say that is a huge priority, particularly for the rural areas. Then I think the drive for renewable energy, affordable renewable energy that can power the data centres that we're going to need more and more of. I think that's absolutely critical. And then the third one I would add would be skills. Because we've got in the room some of the best tech minds and representatives of the best tech companies in the country, in the world probably. But the fabulous products that you develop are not taken up adequately in the wider economy. The public sector has a long way to go, and the private sector as well. There's hundreds of thousands of SMEs who barely use one tech solution. And in order for them to generate the demand that must be of benefit to the members of techUK and to deliver the much better service that AI and other technologies will enable, they need to be deploying far more rapidly and far more extensively than they are to date. So, and one of the big limiting factors is the lack of skills, adequate skills training. I was really pleased to hear, I think, your president earlier of Microsoft talking about a skills program that Microsoft are enabling people to use for free on AI. I shall certainly look that one up myself.
I think that was the AI Navigator.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, the AI Skills Navigator. Yes, more of that. So those would be my 3 starters for 10.
I'm sure we'll come back to all of those. And actually, one of them, Hugh, I was going to pick up with you. Obviously, an industry company, global company. What infrastructure do we need? And why are, therefore, we always come to data centres. Is it just data centres, and why are data centres, it's a stupid question, but I want to start with the basics. Why are they so important to that kind of regional growth and regional ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, at its heart, a data centre is an AI factory. And we've sort of decided that AI is a good thing. I mean, certainly Microsoft, we've decided AI is a good thing. And it's transformational for the economy and for the way that the economy can operate and the way that public sector can operate. But it's also a general purpose technology. And a bit like electricity is a general purpose technology. Its creation and its use unlocks opportunities everywhere else. But we've got to do better than electricity, and that's the reality. There are 700 million people globally who have no access to technology, to electricity. We can't afford to have that with AI. It really is as transformational as that. And that means that we've got to bring data centers to locations where AI is going to be used. So that takes us to the need to build these AI factories here in the UK. There are challenges associated with doing that. Sarah Cardell spoke earlier about her 4 Ps. We've got at least 4 Ps. I think I could probably go further and have 5, but certainly we've got to address, to some of the points that you're making, power, without a doubt, which includes, pylons. Let's add that as another P. We've got to have planning. I mean, actually, we've made a lot of progress already. This government's made a lot of progress already with planning, but permitting needs to be added to that as well. These are the kind of building blocks for bringing these AI factories to the UK. Very exciting. I think every one of us and our competitors are doing this, but we're going to be investing $80 billion in data center infrastructure this year.
Yeah.
So we're talking about large sums of money, but huge impact.
Yeah, and they're really the engines of that AI growth. Henri, I see you nodding away, I think, in terms of that, the importance of the data centres. And thinking about other components that make a thriving local tech ecosystem, what do you see as key from your vantage point? And where do you think we really are struggling to, get the infrastructure that we need?
I think it's notable, really, that there are 2 types of infrastructure. I think that the digital sector always tells us they want. Obviously, there is a particular infrastructure that sector relies on, that Margot very rightly referred to. And then there's energy, and in the case of many other digital businesses, transport, in terms of being able to get people to their workplaces. I'm always struck by the fact that what was called Skybet, now part of a wider global betting and gaming group, but essentially a tech business in what it does. When it was a young growing business, had to have offices in Sheffield and Leeds because it couldn't attract people who lived in South Yorkshire to a place that was literally just down the road because the transport links were so bad. And I think my reflection, on a lot of what I agree in Margot's remarks, is that the wider economy will hugely benefit from digital tech in order to become more productive. And so the role of techUK's members in raising productivity more widely in the economy is huge. And I think responding to the kind of AI factories point, the only challenge I would make, it was debated at the Convention North by mayors and civic leaders recently in Preston just over a week ago, is that our world-class universities, our other assets, have lots to bring to the AI R&D factory, not just to making the widgets themselves. Because absolutely, there are prime sites for data centres here and in Scotland, particularly located close to renewable energy sources, which are already there. Much of the wind energy being generated in Scotland and offshore in the North Sea absolutely can and should be part of solving some of the energy demand that comes from this sector. But I do think it's worth saying that the data centres in and of themselves don't employ that many people, unlike factories back in the Industrial Revolution. So if you want to get the knowledge and the value chain out of AI, you also need to be contributing and using that data center capacity, not just anywhere in the world as it can be, but also drawing on it here in terms of making those changes in businesses on the ground. And that might not just be about doing the research, that's, for example, done by businesses like DeepMind, where you are in London, but also how you apply AI technology. This isn't just about plain old-fashioned adoption or applying particularly complex advances. A lot of this, as Margot rightly pointed out, is actually about diffusion. This is about helping the rest of the economy to use the digital tools available to them, rather than thinking about the digital economy as something separate to the rest of UK PLC. And in terms of its productivity benefits, yes, there are people who work in tech and they're paid well and they have good quality jobs, but more importantly, they can raise the living standards of the rest of the country by changing the nature of work and by bringing greater value to businesses in sectors that actually have very little to do directly with tech or digital, but can hugely benefit from some of the tools that those of you in the room today can help to provide you.
No, absolutely, Henri. It's about building the right foundations in the infrastructure the industry need, but also the diffusion and what supports the diffusion. So Chris, I'd love to come with your Labour Growth Group hat on. Where do you see, or what do you see as key for therefore driving that diffusion and driving that economic growth? So it's not just supporting the industry as a whole, but supporting all industries.
Yeah, no, I think so. I don't disagree with anything anybody's said so far, but I sort of touch particularly on this planning point, because it's important in order to get data centres built, but actually it's crucially important in order to get the energy infrastructure built, the transport infrastructure built, that this country is going to need in order to take advantage of any of the economic opportunities, particularly the AI opportunities that are coming down the track. I just to note, like literally staring out, looking at Brunel's name on the wall behind, and fully aware, as Henri would tell you, that we live in a country that seems completely unable to fund a railway line that runs from London to the north anymore. And that is unforgivable that we've reached that point. And it is so important that we go as far as is possible in the planning and infrastructure bill and the planning changes that this government is putting forward to ensure that we can build the homes that people in this country need. We can build the energy infrastructure that this country needs, whether that's pylons, whether that's wind farms, solar panels where they're required, but also nuclear, which we know is the only way to create new nuclear, SMRs, AMRs, making sure that we have enough of them to provide the really quite extensive increase in energy that this country is going to require in order to power the AI future. Making sure that we are a world leader in getting those kind of projects online is so crucially important, and I think it's promising to see that Number 10 specifically has set up a task force in order to work out how we can do that as quickly as possible. But broadly speaking, unless there is no room for half measures on this. The main diagnosis that we've got in the Labour Growth Group is that the biggest problem facing this country, which I think is probably self-evident to most people in this room, is that the economy basically hasn't grown since the great financial crisis in 2007, 2008. People's median wages are roughly the same now as they were then. We cannot afford as a country, particularly in a more insecure and unstable world, to continue down that route. And the biggest barrier to economic growth is the inability to get things built in this country. And we need to go as far as possible in making sure we change that.
Sue, I know this is breaking the rules, but
Go
can
ahead.
I just jump in quickly there. It's crazy that we've got a situation where we can build a data center in 18 months, but can't connect it for 10 years.
Yeah. And that's connection to the grid.
That's connection to the grid.
So no rules broken, don't worry.
Just think about how different the world was 10 years ago. All right? Just think about how different the world was 10 years ago or 12 years ago. We have absolutely no idea what the world's going to look like in 12 years' time, what the data centers are going to need, what is going to be required. And if we are running at that kind of lag, there is no way this country will ever be able to keep up with our competitors, or even worse, be able to keep up with our adversaries. So It's so important we speed that process up as dramatically as is necessary. I think the planning and infrastructure bill tomorrow will be a good first step towards that.
Well, I'm going to come to Kevin and maybe ask you about the government's plans and does it go further enough? And then Hugh, maybe come back to you on from what you've heard, does that address that problem? But Kevin, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Government's plan to announce plans to overhaul the planning system, potentially make it easier to build infrastructure. So do you think those changes go fast enough or go far enough to drive the change that we need? Or do we need to see more from government on this? What's your perspective? What's your analysis?
It's a great question, and actually it doesn't even start with planning. It starts with recognising it's a cross-government, interdepartmental issue, which is the regulatory framework around energy and water has prevented us from having sufficient grid capacity planned way into the future. But also the same with water too, which is an issue, obviously for data centres that comes to environmental impact. They've not built a single reservoir since the 70s. So this is a critical piece across the whole economy that we're just experiencing in the data centre and wider tech infrastructure sector. So that's what needs to happen. And we've yet to see, with some movements on regulation, reworking the regulators in energy and water. But of course, planning is critical. I think the early signs were good. We had technically called in by Angela Rayner, Secretary of State, just after the election, but announced by the Chancellor the 2 data centre call-ins on the Greenbelt, one of which, of course, in Hertsmere was ultimately consented, I think, just last month. What that showed was the government was willing to intervene, and it demonstrated that there's a broken planning process, not just when it comes to digital infrastructure, but all infrastructure. So I think there's been some positive moves. The first on the policy side around updating the National Planning Policy Framework to specifically mandate local authorities to identify and prioritise data centres and other specialised industries in their local plans, i.e. identify sites where a data centre would be appropriate. It sounds simple, but it hasn't happened before. And what that means is that becomes an investor-grade proposition, in a way having a field or a former industrial estate isn't quite so compelling. So having policy change at the national level in the framework's important. But what matters then is how that decision is determined, and as Hugh said, in what kind of timeline. There's been, obviously, we can put data centres into the national strategic infrastructure planning process. That has some upsides. It's more technocratic. It does have some more onerous financial and design obligations up front, but that will suit probably bigger schemes. But actually, it's really more the changes that happen in the local planning system, I think, which should make the bigger difference. And those are planning changes that, one, recognise data centres as a special, potentially use class in their own right, which we saw as a suggestion in the AI Opportunities Plan, but also recognising that local authorities need to be investigating the employment opportunities available across the economy and not just prioritising housing alone. And that, I think, is where we have the biggest problem when it comes to will the planning changes work. Because you can change regulation and you can reform local government, but that doesn't necessarily then give you the change we need. And fundamentally, that comes down to resources, both at national and local level. There simply aren't enough planning officers, as kind of prosaic as that sounds, to determine all these planning applications. There aren't enough planning inspectors at the national level to review not just data centre applications, but transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, national grid connections, reservoirs. So we have to face the real challenge that we don't have enough capacity in local and national government to determine these applications. And I think that's probably the biggest watch out. We can change the rules, but if we can't then get the scheme consented quickly or then connected to the grid via another official decision-making process, then the industry is still going to be hamstrung.
Oh, I'm going to come to Margot in a minute, but Hugh, did you just want to come back on that?
Well, I was going to say that sounds like a perfect opportunity to introduce some AI. And that really does get to the point, is how do you actually look again at processes, and how do you introduce...
Or do things differently, maybe.
And do things differently, as we also heard this morning, rather than just did from Kate, not just digitising a process. Yeah. But actually then, if you've got a shortage of resources and there are not enough people doing the jobs, then adjust the job that needs to be done so that you can introduce AI to help.
Yeah,
but particularly in the planning system, I think there's a lot. If anybody, I'm sure most people in this room, or many in this room, will have to deal with the planning system at some point, and therefore they will be perfectly aware of, even way before you get to AI, the opportunities of making it more technologically advanced and simplify the process are quite enormous. I think there were still people faxing PDFs quite recently that I was told about. So there's a lot to do there. I also think there's a lot AI can do in order to triage it. But ultimately, I still think it's true that we are going to need more planners in the process, which I bring up because the British Chamber of Commerce is looking for people to help sponsor and fund the training opportunities in order to get the planners into the system that this country needs. So if anybody is interested in helping and supporting with their fund in order to do so, please do reach out to them, because this country is so desperate to get more planners in, and I think it's really good for our economy in order to do so.
I know two planners who have recently retired, so maybe we need to get some maybe out of retirement, but I'm not sure they would thank you for that. But Chris, just before I come to Margot, sorry Margot, I'm going to come back to you, but Chris, just on this, I sense the current appetite within your parliamentary colleagues for, you know, overhauling this and getting the planning reforms needed is high, right? Is that what your sense? Do you have a sense that there'll be any kind of great momentum or significant resistance or barriers that we might need to think ahead as this goes through Parliament?
Well, I mean, you know, debates will always play out, and the Labour Party is always a broad church. But I think, you know, the Labour Growth Group, which I'm co-chair of, is the largest group of backbenchers. And we are determined to push the government to go as far as is necessary on this. You know, to be blunt, there is a massive political risk in us failing to achieve this. There is no way we are going to get elected at the next election after the cost of living crisis, unless people are starting to feel like they've got more money in their pockets. There is no way that we're going to achieve that without making quite substantial changes to the planning system. But also, like, you know, we've elected MPs from the generation that's really faced the forefront of the housing crisis at the very least. You know, we're determined to get those homes built, and like, it keeps me up at night. It keeps me up at night. You know, we talk about the possible benefits. We also need to talk about the cost of failure. Right? If we have 14 years of economic growth that is as stagnant as the 14 years that's just gone, this country is in a really, really precarious situation. So we need to push as far and as fast as possible to ensure that doesn't happen.
Great, thank you. So Margot, it's all on national government, right? It's all their responsibility, or going to the point Kevin was talking about, what's the responsibility at the local level? Because there's so much opportunity here for change. And I know you're very focused at the kind of looking at regional ecosystems and local ecosystems in Warwickshire, I believe. But is this just the role for national government to take the lead here? Or how does the local government take a lead here as well?
Well, I think there has to be some sort of virtuous circle achieved, because each level of government has a role to play and can add value to the process or can add detriment to the process. So I think to get that virtuous circle, you need a good steer from national government, sometimes funding. There needs to be genuine devolution, not just of responsibilities, but funding as well. And you need local authorities and also the mayoralties and the combined authorities that already represent a large chunk of the country to work together to champion their areas to attract the investment that will provide the basis for a successful tech sector in vast majority of parts of the country. I think also the national government has to play its part in terms of the regulatory environment, because that is a national responsibility. And I think that we have become a bit complacent in this country. And I think we pride ourselves on having a very well-developed regulatory system that people can trust, that is pretty transparent and impartial. But I think it's become too slow and not responsive enough to the technological opportunities that are proceeding at a far more rapid rate than regulators can currently keep abreast of. And I'll just give you a kind of case study from my region of the Midlands. We in Britain are leaders in R&D when it comes to autonomous vehicles, personalised mobile solutions, the electrified transport, and that whole category of transport, which, by the way, accounts for approximately 28% of emissions. So it's really important that we electrify our transport systems. But the regulators have been really stifling the opportunity to commercialise the fantastic research that we do. So when it comes to test beds, it's very timid, I think, in this country. And you look at countries like the United States, Germany, where they already have a developed, connected and autonomous vehicle sector, driving passengers around in parts of Texas, San Francisco, even parts of Europe. And we are too timid. And ultimately, if we don't get that regulatory environment to keep pace with changing technologies, then the manufacturing opportunities